This is always the exciting bit. Good morning, everyone joining us now. Thank you very much. We're going to just give it a minute or two to get as many people as possible in, and then we will kick off. In the meantime, if you want to grab a cup of tea or coffee, if you haven't got one ready, maybe introduce yourself in the chat, say hello. And if you're watching Bake Off this evening, say who you'd like to win, if it's not too controversial. Team Forward Action is devastated that Jürgen's out. It's interesting to see how the subtitles caught up with that. Organs out, apparently. It should have been Jürgen. Yes, Chiara, we agree. He was robbed, but it keeps it fun. Brilliant. Okay. Lovely to see so many people joining here this morning. I'm just going to give it to 9:02 and then we will get started. Okay. Let's go. We've got more than 50 people here this morning, so that's really exciting. And I'm very glad that everyone could join us. I'm personally particularly excited about this one. I've been at Forward Action for a year now, and the work that we've been doing with the European Climate Foundation and with Hope for the Future is really exciting, because so much of what we do is talking to people who are already on our side and reaching and getting them to do things that may have already been thinking about. But this project is a really interesting one for taking research and thinking about how do we use that research in a practical way to reach new audiences, which is something I think that everyone in progressive movements can learn from and hopefully implement in their work. So I won't talk much longer because it's my co-speakers here who've got the interesting things to say. So we're talking today about how to reach new audiences and gain new supporters. Jessie, do you want to move us along so I can quickly introduce the speakers for today, and then I will switch my video off and hand over. So I'm Ali Walker-Davies. If you've come to the webinars before, you will have seen me before. I'm our partnerships director. I look after all of our lovely partners at Forward Action and all the work that we do strategically to try and make sure that we're bringing progressive causes to digital mobilization, making change happen in the world. And this morning, we're really pleased to have Sarah Jordan here, who's the director for Hope for the Future. Hope for the Future, if you don't know, is a charity that supports people to have effective engagements with elected representatives on climate change. So it's all about communicating about the climate crisis. And then Jessie is going to be talking us through the case study this morning, who's one of our brilliant digital strategy managers. So the format for this morning is we're going to do a presentation for 30 to 40 minutes. There's a lot of information in there, but hopefully be plenty for you to take on board and use as actionable insights. You can ask questions throughout using the Q&A, and my colleague Kate and I will answer the questions that we can in the Q&A function, and we will save up the questions as well to ask to Jessie and Sarah at the end. So please don't be shy about asking questions. If we run out of time to answer the questions, we will follow up with either a blog or an email where we answer a few more of those as well. So do keep the questions coming throughout. We're using closed caption subtitles for this webinar. So if you would like to access those, you can click on the bottom and there should be a little subtitle settings, closed captions option there. So you can switch those on. And we are recording the session, so we'll be able to send that out to everyone as well. So I think that is all the housekeeping that I need to do. And I will turn my camera off now and hand over to Jessie. Enjoy.
Thanks so much, Ali. Yeah, hi everyone, welcome. Lovely to see or just know that you're here by the little counter at the top. Yeah, so I'm just going to kick off talking about why you might be here. So yeah, kind of from the content that we've got in today's webinar, we're hoping you either kind of want to broaden your supporter base, you think that your supporter base might not be particularly diverse, or you've got a lot of sort of the same type of people on there. You might have ideas for sort of new concepts or campaigns, but you're not sure whether they will work. You might have questions about how to talk to people that you know kind of believe in what you do, or at least are sympathetic to the cause, but don't actually sort of take action or take that next step and sign up, etc. And then finally, you might just be here because you're really interested in climate change and how we can get more people taking action to address it, which is, yeah, kind of the focus of the case study that we're going to use today. So yeah, we're going to split this webinar. We're going to do a little bit of an intro on kind of why new audiences are so important. And Sarah and I are going to run through kind of what we did in the work that we did together kind of end of last year, beginning of this year. Then we're going to go through kind of 5 key lessons, so big things that we learned that were surprising. And then we're going to talk about 3 things that you could try, so like recommendations from us from this work. And then, as Ali said, we'll have plenty of time, hopefully, if we're speedy enough, for questions at the end. So firstly, why new audiences? So when we think about essentially, if you want to accelerate change and if you want to do it well, we all know you need lots of people, and you need lots of people from different viewpoints, walks of life, backgrounds. You need them taking action, you need them being part of that change. However, even when we all agree on something being an issue that needs action, we can really disagree on kind of the details of how we're going to address that. And we can also all have really different motivations for sort of wanting to take action. So using the climate crisis, obviously, we only need to look at sort of the recent example of the really varied responses to the Insulate Britain protests to see that while we mostly all agree on the fact that we need to act to combat climate change, we can really disagree on sort of how we do that, what's the most important action to take, what else we need to consider. So essentially, if we can find ways to bring a new audience into the conversation and take them from being kind of mildly sympathetic to the cause to being really passionate, feeling heard, feeling like their opinions are being kind of pulled through into that discussion and that action, then we can massively accelerate progress. So that's like the big picture, but just drilling it down a little bit more now to the focus of the work we're going to discuss today. So using the climate change example, on the left here, we've got the Gretas, basically, the people who are going to take action, they're going to donate, they're going to campaign, kind of no matter what. They're the people you're already talking to already. They're really passionate about the cause, they're motivated, they're responding to kind of existing messaging. On the right, we've got Trump and the other people who are ambivalent or against the cause, unlikely to get them on board at all. Now, most organizations know their audience or their Gretas really well. And, you've done kind of extensive research on them and you know how to kind of get more of those people. Amazing. But essentially, any identified audience, like the Gretas, is going to be a limited pool. And if you want kind of more people taking action, more people donating, etc., you want more people at the top of that funnel. So signing up to that email list, and then you've got more people to ask to take on those meaningful actions later on. So yeah, you can only start really like making progress there if you kind of look at this bit here, so this arrow. So rather than just the Gretas, what about these people who are maybe slightly sympathetic to the cause, but why are they not taking action so far? What about it isn't compelling to them? What about it makes them feel like it's not something that they want to be part of? So one thing I hope that is really clear today is we're really aware that a lot of time organizations they've done lots of research on, behavioral, attitudinal segments and all that kind of stuff. But then they're not exactly sure maybe what to do with that or how to get value out of that quickly. And hopefully today we can help show a couple of tactics that will work in a sort of relatively low resource way. But first, Sarah, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, there we go, first slide deck malfunction, a little bit about what kind of Hope for the Future's thoughts were on this work and why sort of new audiences were important for you.
Yeah, definitely. So this slide is kind of showing a few of the challenges that we were facing as an organisation. So first of all, we are, or at least at the time this project was running, we were a very small organisation and we had very small comms capacity as well. But we do have a really local focus as well, and we work with groups and individuals in communities across the UK in a way that is really tailored to their local area. So that meant that our work is it's quite resource intensive, and we have to balance the different priorities and opinions that people might have on taking action on the climate crisis. And there's been a lot of demand for our work. So until recently, we've only really been able to work with those who actually approach us, rather than going out to find new audiences to work with. So this was a really exciting opportunity for us to be kind of reaching out and, going beyond the Gretas and the people on the left-hand side of that arrow and be reaching new audiences who might be slightly less engaged. So we had quite limited resource to actually find and test these new audiences, but this project was an opportunity to use the Britain Talks climate research, which we're going to talk, or Jessie's going to talk a bit more about in a bit. And this made it a lot more feasible for us to actually research and test these new audiences. And we didn't need to kind of create those audiences ourselves because they were already there through the Britain Talks Climate Toolkit, which was fantastic. And yeah, we felt that our existing messaging was broadly appealing. You know, we are a non-partisan organisation, we don't have our own campaigns or agenda, and we just support and train and educate those who do. So our existing messaging is broadly appealing and not too controversial. However, we couldn't really be sure beyond the supporters that we had already recruited, and we had a sense that we were largely reaching the usual suspects, you know, the Gretas and those on the left-hand side of the arrow. And in our case, this was the progressive activists of the Britain Talks Climate segments, which I think Jessie is going to tell us a bit more about.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That is the next slide. So yeah, here we go. So these are the progressive activists that Sarah just mentioned. So yeah, this is how this project started. Essentially, Britain Talks Climate Research. It's now a toolkit developed by Climate Outreach, and it's essentially evidence-based. They surveyed 10,000 British adults, 12 focus groups, 35 in-depth interviews. It's a really, really extensive piece of research. And essentially, the initial kind of findings were that organisations in the climate movement were consistently reaching some segments of the British population, but not reaching others. And this was kind of the result of this, is we've got these 7 segments, and we've got kind of information about what their values are, what they motivate them, what they're kind of pessimistic about. And then we've got guidance on how we might be able to tweak messaging to basically resonate better with these people. So yeah, as Sarah said, progressive activists kind of had a bit of a hypothesis that they were already maybe present in Hope for the Future's kind of supporter list and work, and the people who are doing sort of the most, that taking on the highest bar actions. And that's actually true of like the climate sector in general. They're massively involved, massively involved in kind of climate action and debate. But the other groups really not so much. And we've actually got a couple of disengaged groups here as well, who are just not kind of engaging, you know, in even sort of lower bar sort of political actions and things like that. So Forward Action were asked to test this research and to find a way to use it to attract new audiences on digital platforms, basically prove whether it does help or not, whether using this framework helps you kind of diversify the audiences that you're recruiting. So how did we do that? Essentially, this is the approach that we took. So we decided to craft different messaging frameworks to match each of the segments using all of that research and the toolkit from Britain Talks Climate. We used that messaging to create values-based sign-up pages, which I'm going to show you a couple of examples of later. We advertised those pages to broad audiences, so no segmentation at all, just going out to like everybody. And then what we did is we put a follow-up survey in our kind of sign-up page action to confirm whether that different messaging was actually attracting different audiences. So yeah, that's the sort of overarching view, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on that now. But firstly, we chose to focus on three of the 7 segments. And I just wonder, yeah, Sarah, if you could talk a little bit about kind of what the rationale was there for choosing these particular 3.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we felt that the progressive activists were probably the group that we were already engaging the most, and probably made up the largest proportion of our audience. We also felt that established liberals, which you can see at the bottom there, were a group that we were probably already engaging at least a little bit, so they were already a kind of warm group. And as a group, they tend to feel politically empowered and optimistic for the future, but need to recognise the opportunity to leverage their community. So for the established liberals, we used messaging around kind of doing our bit, using your voice, and also European partners, because that's another thing that's been identified that established liberals kind of respond well to. But we also wanted to be a bit more aspirational and, you know, use this opportunity to be reaching groups that we were fairly sure we weren't already reaching. So we selected the 2 disengaged groups. We didn't really have any resource internally to do testing or recruitment on these disengaged groups, so it felt like a really good opportunity to, you know, use the resource and work with Forward Action to engage these groups. As an organisation, we're here to support and empower people to engage with their elected representatives. So it felt like reaching disengaged groups was really important so that we could show them that they can have their voices heard and we could support them in doing that. And this is really important, you know, because climate change affects everyone, and everyone has to be part of that solution. So we need to be reaching disengaged audiences as a movement, so that no one gets left behind. So yeah, this felt like a fantastic opportunity to be testing out that messaging and seeing what really resonated with those 2 groups.
Yeah, definitely. I think we were really excited about that too, just because we've not done much of this kind of specific audience like research before. So trying to get into the minds of a more disengaged group was really, really exciting. I will add as well that we did know that whatever we did, because it's climate and because as well it was a digital action we were asking people to take, we would still likely get a really big response from the progressive activists. So that was something that kind of Britain Talks Climate told us would be the case anyway, was that they will still be a pretty high responder to any kind of climate messaging. So what was the action that we asked them to do? Basically, we asked them to sign a handraiser. So if you haven't seen handraisers before, they're basically values-based sign-up pages, really, really low bar action, just add your name, minimal data input, very short form on the right there. And basically, a lot of supporters are quite motivated after taking this first action. So we usually do some kind of like immediate follow-up. It's usually share or donate. As I said already, at this time, we were using a survey to basically corroborate whether people that we were targeting with our messaging were from those audience segments. So we had our 3 audiences, which Sarah just talked through the rationale of choosing there. And what we did is we basically created 3 of those handraiser pages that I just showed you for each of the audiences. So we had 9 pages altogether, all different kind of framings. At Forward Action, we always test our different framings, even if we're working on a really specific campaign, we still test kind of different angles on that campaign or ask, because you never know. So yeah, we had the guidance here of how to speak to kind of each of these segments. We still wanted to try a few different angles. So just to kind of explain the journey here, we also created 9 Facebook ads for each of the hand raisers. So we ended up with a large amount of Facebook ads. So we had 81 Facebook ads, again, all with different messaging, different images, things like that. And then when a user clicked on the Facebook ad, you came to one of the hand raiser pages, signed up through the very, very easy form, opted in to Hope to the Future, hopefully, and then we're asked to answer a few questions to help kind of find out a bit more, to help Hope for the Future find out a little bit more about that audience. And you're then taken to a type form survey. So this was like outside of any personal data, anything like that. And this survey was 16 questions about sort of values and beliefs. And that was developed as part of the research by Climate Outreach for the Britain Talks Climate Toolkit, and basically meant that we'd be able to say with a really high degree of accuracy kind of which segment a person was kind of falling into if they answered all of those 16 questions. I will say now, 16 questions seemed like a lot to me. I was very skeptical about whether people would complete and get all to the end. But yeah, we'll come onto that now. Oh, my video's starting again. There we go. There we are. Okay, so the headlines. So we ended up with nearly 9,000 signers of our hand raisers, and 74% of those opted in to hear from Hope for the Future by email, which was really, really exciting. Our benchmark is usually like 50 to 70%. And I think we had lower expectations here because the messaging was kind of so varied and obviously sort of targeted. So we thought that might affect the sort of conversion rates there. We also had 54% of those who signed a hand raiser and were then given the opportunity to do the survey actually completed it, which was much higher than I think our original initial kind of estimate was maybe 20% with a survey of that size. So yeah, really, really kind of pleasing. And we could see from the start that with our budget, we were going to get a really, really good sort of chunk of data, about, I think, over 4,000 survey responses is what we ended up with. We knew we were going to end up with a lot of data to then be able to interrogate and analyze whether each hand raiser got the correct or the targeted segment. So yeah, Sarah, how did this kind of compare with your like initial expectations of the work?
Yeah, I mean, it was fantastic. We hadn't really run a campaign like this before, so didn't really know what to expect in terms of numbers, but we definitely weren't expecting to exceed Forward Action's expectations of the numbers of sign-ons, and obviously it was great that such a high proportion of people were also signing up to the mailing list as well, because that meant, you know, ongoing engagement, not just the kind of one-off. And also fantastic that so many people were filling in the survey, because as you say, it was quite a lot of questions, but the information was really important to us to, you know who exactly we were reaching. So yeah, it was a brilliant result.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely to end up with that kind of amount of data to interrogate. So I'm not going to go into all of the data because we would be here until lunchtime. And so what I've done is slim this down to, we're now going to ask you guys, all of the attendees, some questions about the sort of the headline results. So firstly, we're just going to ask, which framing did our disengaged traditionalists respond to? So just as a reminder, the disengaged traditionalists were characterized as skeptical, alienated, traditional, having a strong sense of British pride and family. And we've got these 3 hand raisers here that we advertised to this audience. So I'll give you a minute to take a look and vote. Yeah, we've got British leadership and jobs on the left, seaside towns and protecting those in the middle, and then next generation on the right.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll now, but you'll see it's a brilliantly even split across the board. So if everyone can see those results, 80% of people got to participate in that. But yeah, do you see, Jessie, there's a split across the board.
That is very interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, I also understand you haven't been given that much information about the audience. So good guesses all around. This was the result. So our winner was actually the seaside towns framing. So of all of the responses of the survey, each of these hand raisers got, these are the percentages that were the intended segments, so the disengaged traditionalists. So 9.8% for seaside towns. So that was like a pretty significant proportion. And also obviously just sort of proves here, you know, why we're always saying still test those framings, even when you've got a good idea about what might resonate. Because, you know, if we'd gone with our British leadership idea without testing, we'd be sitting here with sort of 1.1% rather than that lovely 9.8% instead. So yeah, seaside towns is our winner there. The next question is actually about, so which hand raiser engaged the kind of widest range of audiences? So as I said before, we're always expecting progressive activists to be kind of a significant chunk of those survey responders. And what we've got here is we've got, on the left, we've got our European partners hand raiser, which was developed for our established liberals. And then on the right, we've got that British seaside towns hand raiser again, which was developed for the disengaged traditionalists. So yeah, which of those do you think engaged the, sorry, this is very fast for whoever's doing the polls here, but which generated the sort of widest range, so least progressive activists and the kind of the most varied responses from those 7 segments. I'll give you another minute.
Took me a little bit of time to get my head around like what success looked like for this one, but it was about getting as many different audience segments as possible responding. Is that right, Jessie?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, looking like big picture, basically, which one kind of, yeah, gets more across all 7 segments and less of that sort of typical progressive activists. But yeah, it is quite a big question that we've tried to put into like 7 words. So
okay, ending the poll now and sharing your results. There is a clearer winner on this one, according to our audience.
Yay, and they got it right. So yeah, 76% for British seasides, and that is true. So essentially this European partners hand raiser, of all the responses we got, 60% of those were categorized as progressive activists, and then we had a really kind of small amount of all the other 6 segments, whereas with the British seaside towns we only had 35% progressive activists, and we had a much more kind of consistent spread. We had disengaged traditionalists, which we were the Zingdwap, we had disengaged battlers, we also had big proportion of loyal nationalists, essentially like that whole like middle section of our segments, which was really, really exciting that we've managed to like push that away, maybe not just towards the disengaged traditionalists, but away from that progressive activists and across the other segments in a much higher percentage. So those are my two questions kind of on the specific data. Now we're going to just talk about like what did we learn? What were the kind of the key learnings from this? And the first one is just that everyone cares about the climate, which is a very pleasing thing to learn. That corroborated with what the Britain Talks climate audience research had shown, is that everyone does care. They just have different kind of motivations, concerns. And I think the really good thing here is that despite the fact that we only actually targeted 3 of the segments, we did have some responses from every segment. So it does just show that there's sort of like crossover there in terms of values and all that stuff. That means kind of changing your messaging for one segment just means you'll broaden it in general. So that was the first positive takeaway. And the next one is just we found interrogating the messaging is worthwhile. So I put a screenshot here from the creative session that we did initially to try and get into the heads of these different audience segments. And Sarah is just going to talk about that process and how kind of Hope for the Future found that.
Yeah, the creative session was really interesting for us, particularly because we had never used hand raisers before or run this sort of this level of ad campaign. So it was interesting to see, a bit more about the process, but probably more importantly, it was really interesting to learn more about the segments we'd selected and really get into their mindsets and start thinking about how they might want to be communicated with and what might resonate with them. So we thought about each of the segments' worldview, their values, any red flags that they might have, which I think is really important. So for example, the disengaged battlers, they characteristically feel disempowered, but they value validation, respect and feeling heard. And their red flags would be false positivity and false promises. So this was really important for understanding how we might communicate with people from those different segments. And interestingly, it's similar to our approach of engaging MPs and understanding their values and their worldviews. So it was really interesting to then kind of apply that to trying to reach new audiences and speak to the people that we were trying to reach.
Yeah, that's such an interesting comparison, finding out that you also did that already for sort of the MPs you were trying to target or talk to. Interrogating messaging, definitely worthwhile. Also really good for like just your broad messaging. I think just going through this process, definitely like from my perspective, made me think, oh yeah, I'd never thought that actually might not be something that everyone kind of agrees with, or that some people might find, condescending or something like that. So yeah, really worthwhile to go through that process. The third learning, the survey didn't deter. Maybe I was just being really pessimistic about how many people would do this, but we had over obviously 50% of the people who signed the hand raise to complete that survey. I think, if we had kind of more control over what the survey sort of included, we definitely would have said, maybe close to kind of 6 to 10 questions max. But this survey came from the Britain Talks Climate Toolkit. It's very reliable. It's been developed with all of that research. So it was kind of imperative that we use that. And I think, it probably helped that people were assured that no personal data would be stored along with their answers. So that was made kind of clear in the initial sort of opening sentence, which I think, probably helped people be a bit more okay with submitting all of that just after they've added their email as well. So that was another positive. And then we had, I guess, more of a mixed one. So I think the comments here were really, really varied. It's definitely kind of the most like active comment section I've maybe seen on some like of the recent campaigns. There's some really surprising one. Obviously, there's a lot of different viewpoints. I think before Hope for the Future, done a lot of mainly organic. So obviously then you're talking to people who are kind of already in your circle. And this, we're obviously going out, we're paying. So we're paying to push people to this content. So already more people. And then we're also deliberately using kind of stronger messaging to target different segments, which then means you're probably going to get more responses. So a couple of like the examples here. As I said, a lot of debate, which you can see by this one comment that has 46 replies, which is quite lively. So Sarah, how did kind of Hope for the Future deal with that? What did you sort of take from it?
Yeah, it was definitely a new one for us. As you say, we generally were reaching quite small audiences and mainly people that we were already engaging or were already kind of within our circles. So it was really interesting to see the level of comments and debate that was going on. But in some ways, it was a really good opportunity for us to kind of showcase our approach and demonstrate how we do communicate, particularly with people who we might not agree with. So speaking to people's values and not engaging in arguments, but just kind of gently challenging or just offering different bits of information. However, sometimes the best thing was to not engage, and people don't always need to have a response. I think this really long comment there is probably a good example of one that actually sometimes you just need to recognize that you're not going to change someone's worldview with a comment. So it's best just to not engage and leave them to it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's, when people come with those opinions, it can also just help sort of think about just that particular ad, taking learnings from that you can apply to kind of how you communicate in general, not just kind of that particular campaign. So it sounds like it didn't end up being too much kind of resource to go back and reply to kind of all of those. The final one is that one segment really surprised us with the data that we got back. So essentially, we had a really high proportion of loyal nationalists, which were not a segment that we targeted. We targeted disengaged battlers, established liberals, which were the one that we struggled with the most to kind of up that percentage, and the disengaged traditionalists, which is just here. The loyal nationalists consistently made up the second biggest segment of the signers, kind of across all those hand raisers. And I think we possibly thought that could be to do with like they're right in between the two segments we are targeting. One of these segments is typically quite disengaged, possibly it might be signing, but maybe not doing the survey, maybe not wanting to complete that 16-question survey. But yeah, it was really interesting. And I know, Sarah, the presence of that segment was particularly of interest to you as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. The loyal nationals was really of interest to us. First of all, we weren't specifically targeting them, as we've heard in the presentation, but also they're a segment that is generally not being reached by the climate movement, or at least not actively being reached out to. But they have the potential to be really influential messengers, particularly with Conservative MPs. And the Britain Talks climate research shows them to have an interest in climate change, but they're not the kind of usual suspects when it comes to engaging on environmental issues as, say, the progressive activists might be. And through our work, we found that MPs can be really persuaded when they're meeting with constituents who aren't the usual suspects. And as Jessie says, the climate impacts messaging seemed to be something that really resonated with this segment, and really seemed to engage them.
Yeah, it was unexpected, but very exciting, like an opportunity, essentially. Yeah, totally agree. Excellent. Sarah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of what's next following this work.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a really exciting new project that is focusing specifically on the disengaged battlers and the loyal nationals. So kind of drawing on the findings that we did find, and particularly around the climate impacts messaging, which seemed to engage the loyal nationals really well, and then green jobs, which seemed to have quite a high level of response rate from the disengaged battlers. And part of this project is kind of using the messaging and reaching out to these audiences, but also looking at the next stage of the process and focusing on kind of once you've engaged them, once they've signed up to the handraiser in your mailing list, actually getting them onto our training sessions and kind of into our projects so that we can support them to go on and actually engage with their MPs. So that's a really exciting project, and it's also really focusing on upskilling our comms team as well, so that we can continue to do this work going forwards as well. Next year, we're going to be running a series of events, and they're going to be in regions across the UK, and the aim of the events is to engage a broader base of constituents and connect them with their MPs and other elected representatives. And we're really hoping to generate a bit of buzz around these events and get good sizes of audiences. So digital outreach will be really key to making a success of that. And thanks to our work with Forward Action, as I just mentioned, our comms team is skilled up in running Facebook ad campaigns and building ads and using targeted messaging. So we're really excited to see how that progresses and what kind of turnout we get to these events next year. And of course, we're really keen to be sharing our learning with others in the climate movement who are looking to engage different groups. So, and as well, you know, everyone on this call, some of you might be outside of the climate movement, but looking to engage audiences in this way. But when it specifically comes to tackling climate change, it's just so important that everyone is included in the conversation. And the findings from this project have shown how we can reach beyond the usual suspects using digital outreach. So it's really important that we do share this more widely within the movement. So, for example, the finding about loyal nationals responding well to the climate impacts messaging, that's something that could be really useful to many others in the climate movement too.
Definitely, yeah. And the new work, as you said, kind of looking at what's next for those people once you've recruited them. What else will they do? Will they kind of go and meet with their MPs? Really, really exciting. So we're nearly at the end now. Just quickly to wrap up, I'm just going to run through kind of what you can do now, or what I kind of would recommend, where you go from here, essentially. So firstly, if you're kind of frustratedly thinking, we don't have our own audience research, or we do, but it's, you know, from a very long time ago, use the Britain Talks Climate Toolkit. Yes, it was developed for the climate sector, but it's an incredibly extensive piece of research. It's really reliable. Using this will mean that you can get to that kind of testing and learning quicker, just as a starting point. We'll obviously link to kind of the toolkit, which has like more details about our work in it, as well as the actual research and like the kind of guidance, which obviously I'm not an expert in, when we send the kind of follow-up email. But I will also say the toolkit has like a lot more practical help in it. So it actually has a more in-depth case study of the work that we've done with Hope for the Future. It actually has a how-to guide that tells you, it's an 8-page how-to guide, exactly like how I would suggest you doing that kind of Facebook ad to survey response pipeline, I guess. And then it also has now, since our work with Hope for the Future, the Britain Talks Climate have also developed, kind of mapped all the segments over onto Facebook audiences. So if you wanted to, you could just go right ahead and target, you know, established liberals based on that kind of like behavioral segmentation, all those different likes and things like that. So that's the first one. I just really recommend it as a resource. The second one, once you've got either Britain Talks Climate Toolkit, or you've got your kind of like audience personas, your research, just reviewing your messaging, that's kind of a screenshot that I showed earlier. It's just like somewhere that you can start. You know, what do these people think about the world? What inspires them? What are their red flags? Just using those to kind of interrogate your current messaging, or even like some content that you put out that maybe didn't go so well, maybe didn't get kind of reach or conversions in the way that you expected it to. A really good example of this is another organization that we work with on this Britain Talks Climate research, just thinking about a lot of their messaging was around you know, asking people to not use their cars, so not use their cars for shorter journeys essentially, and what we realized is actually, if we looked at the kind of research from the Britain Talks Climate Toolkit, is that actually how does that make people who, you know, don't have cars because they can't afford them feel? Does that make them, probably makes them feel kind of more excluded from that, you know, that's an action that they can't, that then they're already doing, but yeah, that messaging just doesn't quite resonate. So that's like one example of kind of the things that this kind of like messaging interrogation can sort of flag, I guess. And then finally, just test and learn by default. Obviously, the example on the slide here is 2 of the hand raises that we developed. And we've got the percentages there of how many of the survey responders were identified as a disengaged group. So one of those 2 groups that were disengaged. We've got this one on the left, which is 7.6%, and the one on the right, which has had 30% of the survey responders as a disengaged group. So as you can see, seaside town framing nearly quadruple. That was with us kind of following the initial guidance. So drive action, create lots of variants, test them, let the data decide which combinations you scale up. Think about your images, copy, always test both. You do need to get kind of buy-in for that as an approach, because it's not a quick win. I would say, like, don't go into anything like this, kind of expecting to find almost like a pot of gold or something, or an audience immediately that is absolutely ready to give money and campaign and all of that good stuff. But what you can do is review the data that you get back. You can do that on a kind of short-term basis. Review the data you get back about audiences and what they respond to, and learn from that and kind of follow those opportunities. So if, as you saw with the kind of loyal nationals, not a segment that we targeted, but really intriguing that they were kind of there in such high numbers, and responding so kind of positively and taking action. So yeah, that is kind of something that I would recommend. I'm also aware that a lot of people won't want to do the kind of 16 question survey, but there's a lot of other ways that you can kind of look at those. You can test these different things, looking at cost per clicks, cost per leads for different ads, trying different audiences for different ads, potentially verifying that with, a 3-question survey just about values, and having a look at how that varies depending on the ad that people have been brought in by. So yeah, lots of kind of like low resource recommendations there, using things like Typeform, and not giving yourself like a lot of work before you get that kind of initial data back and what kind of opportunities to follow. So the key takeaways: make sure you're interrogating values rather than just kind of characteristics or demographics. You'll notice that's what we've talked about a lot throughout this webinar, obviously in the hand raisers, but also with the segments themselves. Find the common ground as well as the differences. As you see, like some of the messaging that we developed for one particular segment had elements in it that really resonated with others. Get buy-in for a kind of test and learn approach, being able to make decisions once you've got that kind of initial data back, and follow those kind of exciting opportunities that the data presents, even if they're different to what you expected, as I said, as was the case with us and the Loyal Nationals segment. So those are the key takeaways. I think we're now going to do questions. I'd lost my way there right at the end. I was like, do I have anything else to say? No, we're going to do questions now. So I think Ali is going to help us out with that.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Jessie and Sarah. I hope everyone found that really interesting and informative. I know that I did. And I really, like I said at the beginning, I love this project. I just think it brings us some new insight. And as Sarah said, we need to have everyone on board. We need to bring everyone along in this. So that's brilliant and hopefully inspiring for everyone. We do have questions, which is awesome. I'm going to start with the kind of tactical one, just so to give people a bit of context that we haven't included here, but there was a couple of questions. So how long did we run the campaign for? What was the average cost per sign up, and how many people did you recruit overall? Are you able to recall those numbers off the top of your head? Go.
I can recall 2 of them. So we ran this campaign for 8 weeks, but it actually was from November to January, because we took a break for Christmas, because our cost per leads massively shot up, as we sometimes see with kind of climate stuff around Christmas. But yeah, 8 weeks of kind of like live time. Average cost per lead was 84p, which again, we saw as like really, really good, because at the time our kind of benchmark was like below £1. So the fact that we were kind of doing that more strong messaging, and weren't sure whether it was going to work, disengaged groups, 84p was great. I cannot remember the total number of people recruited. Was it on a slide? I think it's over 6,000. It's 74% of 8,700. But I can follow up with the numbers.
Great, thank you. And just there's a follow-up question there. Is that opted in leads for that cost per sign up? Yeah. Great. Awesome, thank you very much. Another practical question is, what tools did you use to create the hand raiser?
Oh, this is a good one. We use Blueprint, which is the tool that Forward Action have developed and use on our projects, where we have hand raisers, sign up pages, things like that. So that was the sign up page that we used, and then I think I mentioned obviously the survey. So the Blueprint has that kind of like sliding scroll design, where you saw when I played that video, the kind of next thing just comes straight up. Do you want to do a survey? And then once you click through, then you're on Typeform, which is a survey and like quiz builder that we use quite a lot, because it's very slick and it's not very expensive. So yeah, those are the two tools. Obviously then hope for the future, we're also emailing these supporters through like MailChimp, but that's kind of going to, yeah, I'm getting too far into all the systems.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, and then we've got a few questions around the audience targeting. So the first off is for Sarah, I guess. Did you plan different ongoing comms approaches for the different audiences? And do you monitor how the different audiences have engaged going forward? So whether they're still active on your subscriber list?
For this project, we didn't. So for this project, the main focus was on kind of what audiences were engaging, you know, with the initial hand raisers and who was kind of opting in to receive our mailing going forwards. And then we created a welcome series of emails that we made quite general to all audiences, and we hoped, excuse me, would, you know, continue engaging all of them rather than doing specific messaging for each audience that had signed up. The project that I mentioned that we're currently doing, we are looking a little bit more into this and seeing which audiences do go on to do our training or to engage with us, you know, with our support for meeting with their MPs. But we don't yet have the results for that, unfortunately, because that project's still ongoing. And we've currently got the ads live, and we're sort of just beginning that kind of second part of the process where the people who are engaging are kind of moving on to that second stage.
Brilliant. It'll be really interesting to hear how that next stage goes, and it's a really lovely evolution of this project as well. So good luck with that. Jessie, I think this is a bit for you. So how did you set your Facebook ads to hit the different segments? What sort of demographic info did you put in to optimize to the 3 segments you wanted?
So because we were testing this this research, so we were basically seeing whether you could use it to attract the segments you wanted to, or at least diversify the kind of responses you were receiving. We went out to a broad audience for this part of the project. So that 8 weeks was completely broad. We weren't telling Facebook at all kind of who we wanted to get out of it. And that was basically the kind of methodology that we went with to kind of try and ensure that if there was a difference that was being made, it was because of our messaging. It wasn't because of anything else. We are now using, as Sarah said, in the project that we're currently doing, we're now looking at, we're kind of testing broad and also those audience segments that Britain Talks Climate have now developed. So they've mapped those segments over to Facebook. We didn't have that kind of just to for the start of this project, so we couldn't have used it anyway. But yeah, we did broad to basically test whether it was definitely our messaging, and now we're looking at those segments that Britain Talks Climate have provided that are basically from all of that original like YouGov survey response stuff, and they've mapped that over to like different brands that people might like, and all sorts of that stuff. So yeah, that's all available like in the toolkit if you're kind of more interested in that.
Brilliant, thank you. And then another, just one more on the audiences, was that around the comments that you mentioned, you got quite a lot of comments on the post, and it's obviously quite a controversial topic. So were you worried about comments undermining your careful messaging approach and people balking at not having the same people from their same worldview responding to the comments?
It's a really good question. Well, no, it's a really, really interesting question. And yeah, Jessie, I'd be really keen for you to jump in as well. As I mentioned in the presentation, I think for us, it did feel like a good opportunity for us to be demonstrating how to try and engage with people who don't have a similar worldview to yourselves. Of course, we don't really have control over how other people were then responding to that. So I suppose that was a bit of a concern. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Jessie, what are your thoughts on how to kind of manage that?
Yeah, I think this is something that we've thought about a little bit more as we've continued the work this year, because as I said, we're now also targeting particular segments, and I would say we've probably seen the just the rate of comments increase a little bit more on those particular ad sets. I think the main concern for us was is this affecting the cost per lead? Are people getting so distracted by all the like juicy debate in the comments that they're not actually taking the action we want them to? And that was something that we just monitored really, really carefully. Obviously, I know also like Hope for the Future had a comment policy of like obviously removing anything that was like abusive or inappropriate language and all that kind of stuff. So we knew that basically, although we had like debate, it was always climate focused, and it was, for us, I think it was, we just took it as like a really good opportunity to make sure that we were like kind of absorbing those comments and, like, as I said, sort of like reflecting back on like what in the messaging might kind of make people respond that way. Because I think I've put all the examples that I've put on there are kind of the most sort of the people who are the most sure of what they were saying, but I definitely read some of them and was thinking, oh, actually, I'd not thought about the way that this person might perceive this particular action, and how they might see that as, some people even complaining like, oh, what's it going to do if I add my name? Well, it's a valid question. We can tell you if you sign up, and then you're going to kind of come along this journey with Hope for the Future and engage with your MP and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I definitely saw it as just like a symptom of who we were targeting, and the fact that we were going in with much stronger messaging than we usually do. Usually go with kind of much more like broadly appealing and like emotive. So yeah, so it was a symptom of that, and it was just something that we monitored really, really carefully, especially in terms of that cost per lead. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I've got 3 more questions on the list to ask, and I'm aware that kind of we tend to say these events will run till 9:50, but with the potential to go on till 10. So hopefully people can stick around for these last few questions. And if you have any more to ask, please don't hold back, because we can always follow up afterwards. But so the first one is around the creative workshop and the interrogating and the messaging. And you went on to elaborate a bit more about interrogating messaging, but kind of on the creative workshop and the screenshots you shared, was that based on perception and existing understanding of the groups, or was there new insight in underpinning that? And how did you approach that as a group?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so that was based on understanding of the research that we had. So all of the kind of Hope for the Future colleagues who joined that session, I think there's maybe like 10 to 15 of us, had already kind of been to workshops about this research and what it could mean. They understood all the segments really, really well. So what we were trying to do was reframe that in terms of like Hope for the Future. So that initial, like, what are their values, what are their beliefs, how do they feel about the world, what are the red flags, then turned into, well, what can we sort of like tell them we can do for them, or what can we say that we can do together? And that then kind of went into like almost like generating those headlines for the handraiser, specific to Hope for the Future, and what we could kind of yeah, I guess like motivate people to do. Sarah, I don't know if you have anything else.
Yeah, just to add, I think it's a really good point that we were obviously thinking about the audiences and how we could communicate with them and engage them, but we were really careful about not losing our own sense of our messaging and who we are and the kind of voice and language that we use. So it was really helpful in that session to be bringing the two together. We didn't want to become an organisation who was only speaking to one audience or the target audiences, but then actually alienating our existing audience. So that was a really important kind of gelling of the two types of messaging.
Brilliant, thank you. And what was the resource needed to create all of the campaign collateral? So you mentioned how you had 81 adverts. So what kind of level of investment of time, energy is needed to create the ads, the graphics, the surveys for those?
Well, yeah, it's not insignificant. But yeah, that was all done in-house by our creative team. So obviously we had the creative session where we kind of generated all those ideas, and our process is then that we go away and kind of refine those, add some more in, basically configure it so that we end up with lots of framings that are different enough from each other that we expect that there'll be some kind of variation in the data. But yeah, I will say the 81 ads and actually the 9 hand raisers, we redid this project with another organization, and we didn't do it to that scale. That was very much from us being really apprehensive, really aware that we were the first people ever to test this approach and to test this research. So we were like, we want to cover all bases, because what if only one of these handraisers works in the way that it's meant to. What if we just get, you know, exactly the same segment data back from all of our surveys? So yeah, that was definitely us covering like all of our bases. I would say, like, especially if you've got like a particular campaign or like some kind of messaging that you want to align it with already, you could do 3, and then you'd have, you know, if you did 3 ads for each of those, 27. But yeah, so I'm not quite sure if I've answered the question, but I don't know if you want like number of hours.
No,
I don't know that.
The level of time and energy, that's really good comprehensive answer. And am I right in thinking that the photography was kind of stock images that we use? So it's kind of what we find works best on social is using photographs rather than graphics. So you don't need to invest in design time necessarily and getting a designer on board for these kind of things, right?
Yeah, and we had like no video content either. It was all kind of stock imagery that we relied on. So the main like creative resource was spent on the copy, developing the copy.
Brilliant. And then there's one particularly juicy question, which I think is the last one that I'm going to ask today. Sorry. But do you think with the upcoming Facebook changes to interest terms and targeting, this research and test would be harder to do again?
Yeah, so this particular research wouldn't be, well, shouldn't be, because we, as I said, we went out to broad audiences. I think what we're seeing now that we're running a couple of these hand raisers again, as I said, with a couple of different audiences, and we are just seeing that the cost per lead is higher, obviously since the like iOS changes in the spring. But in terms of the interest, the changes to the interest audiences, that shouldn't affect our the ability to test within broad. What it will affect, I believe, is the mapping that Britain Talks Climate have done of the segments onto, this is exactly what to put in if you want to get them on Facebook. As I understand it, that will affect that. I don't currently know whether they have any plans to like revisit that and kind of adjust it to better to adapt to those changes. But yeah, I would imagine that is something they're most likely looking at. But yeah, those segments, using those audiences in your ad sets, I imagine will become less effective. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, this is coming to the end of our time this morning. So thank you so much again for joining us, Sarah, and thank you, Jessie, for sharing all that brilliant insight. And thank you everyone who's stuck with us for the session. We will be sending out the recording of this as well. So if there's anyone in your organization you think it would be useful for them to hear, please do forward it on. If there's anything you want to check back on, take a look at that, and we will be in touch in the new year with the next webinar for 2022. So thank you very much. It's been really lovely to share this time with you this morning. Have a great day, everyone.